I want you to take a listen to something that Joe Bonamassa said about Jimmy Page, because I think he put his finger on something very interesting about Page's guitar playing and his basic guitar playing style. So let's listen in real quick here to what Joe Bonamassa had to say, and then I'm going to ask you your opinion. Here's Joe Bonamassa talking about Jimmy Page.
And Page arguably is the toughest to kind of copy the sound. I mean, I'm a tribute guitar player, but he had these kind of wacky slurs and things that he would do. And it's, in some circles, it is argued that he was not a very accurate player. I disagree. He's intrinsically very consistent. So that's not a question of accuracy. That's just how he plays. And it's one of the hardest things to do is copy those idiosyncrasies in his playing.
Now that is not only true, but also something that I can personally relate to, because as a guitarist, I've never been able to play like any other guitar player. I can't even cover other songs very well. The only guitarist I've ever been able to emulate at all is Jimmy Page, and I think that's ironically because he also colors outside the lines a bit. Now, I'm not comparing myself to him, and I'm not saying that he's a sloppy player. I'm agreeing with what Joe Bonamassa said right here. Now, I want you to stick around to the very end of this video because I have a clip of Jimmy Page talking about his style and the Les Paul guitar that Joe Walsh gave to him and how that impacted his playing. But before we listen to that clip, I want to reflect back a little bit on what Joe Bonamassa said here. So when he says Page is the most difficult guitarist to emulate, what he means is he's so spontaneous and he's so idiosyncratic that you can't study it. But at the same time, this does not mean that Page isn't a precise guitar player. You may not be able to study your way into sounding just like Jimmy Page, but that doesn't mean that he wasn't a studied guitarist himself. In fact, Page was one of the most well-versed guitar players coming out of Britain in the 70s in terms of musical history and blues history, right along with Eric Clapton and Jeff Beck. He also knew a lot about guitar technique from being a studio musician, where he was accustomed to playing with great precision and according to other people's demands. Although one of the things that made Page a great studio musician was his spontaneity, creativity. At the same time, Page has a reputation for being a sloppy live player. Everybody knows what Eddie Van Halen said about him and what players like Vivian Campbell have said about him. And we've all heard the bootlegs where Page's playing doesn't sound up to snuff. Well, there are reasons why this is the case. And one really strong reason, of course, is Page's overindulgence in drugs and alcohol. But another reason is that Jimmy Page played an entire tour of Led Zeppelin with a broken finger. And if you do your research on Led Zeppelin history, you'll see that he was playing with, this impacted finger for quite some time. I have it planned to do a video in the near future for my What Guitarists Really Sound Like Up Close and Personal series that features Jimmy Page, and I hope that you will subscribe to the channel so that you will be sure to catch that video when it comes out. Right now, if you want to get a taste of what those videos are like, you can see videos on guitarists like Ritchie Blackmore and Randy Rhoads and Eddie Van Halen and David Gilmour and just about every major guitar player you can think of in my Naked Guitarist series, which is available in the archives. Now, back to the Jimmy Page and Joe Bonamassa topic. I would say that Joe has put his finger right on what makes Page such a compelling guitarist. It's not only the fact that he's hard to imitate, it's the fact that he allowed his full expression of personality to come out through the guitar, whether that was playing acoustic guitar and in a reflective capacity and very sensitively, or whether it was, raging proto heavy metal like an Immigrant Song or Achilles' Last Stand. He was also capable of making the guitar cry, blues, and he was very comfortable taking the guitar into unexplored sonic territories. So if you listen to some of the bootleg renditions of Trampled Underfoot, for example, you can hear Jimmy Page doing some incredible soundscaping with his guitar. It never really made it to Led Zeppelin record, but has an awful lot to do with what Joe Bonamassa is driving at there in terms of Page having flair for just pure self-expression through the guitar. That, along with his musical knowledge, is what shapes his guitar style. But there's one other element, and that, of course, is Page's choice of guitar. And that's what I want you to listen to in the following clip, where Jimmy Page talks about his famous Les Paul guitar and how it influenced his playing. Let's listen to Jimmy Page right here.
It's one of those guitars that really was meant to come my way. Because, as I say, Joe Walsh insisted that I bought it, and he was right. It came as it was. The only change that I made to it was that, really, in essence, the tuning heads. But it already came with this scallop neck. I've got to say that I inherited a guitar from Jeff Beck, which was the Yardbirds guitar, which was another brand, I might add. But the reality thing of that is that was another one that came to me, and that had a very shallow neck as well. So it's as though these, somehow this came to me that way. It always was. I mean, even way back in the days when Eric, for instance, was known as a really user.
Suits your style nicely then, eh?
Well, I played around the fact that it was what it was, so that's it. I mean,
And the reason that I wanted to include this clip is because the Joe Bonamassa interview that I featured earlier, in that interview, Joe Bonamassa goes on to talk about, well, Page started off on a Telecaster, and then when he switched to the Les Paul, he continued to play the Les Paul the way that somebody would play a Telecaster, with really fast attack and kind of spitting out those phrases like you can do with a Tele. Well, he explains right here, Page does, that it's because the neck on both the Telecaster and the Les Paul were very shallow and allowed for that type of playing, and that he played with what he was given. So when Jeff Beck gave him the Telecaster, he worked around that, and when Joe Walsh insisted that he buy the Les Paul, he worked around that. But they both had very shallow necks, which contributed to that Spitfire sound that you can hear on some of the early Led Zeppelin records, and I thought that was very interesting. Now, as far as what Joe Bonamassa was saying, I would personally say that for me, Jimmy Page is actually the easiest guitarist to emulate, but that's because I can't play like anybody else. And when I say that, I more or less mean in regards to acoustic guitar. So I find that for an equally idiosyncratic player, although I'm nowhere near as good as Jimmy Page is someone that I can learn a lot from and that I can kind of emulate, although I definitely see what Joe Bonamassa was driving at as far as getting all of those Pageisms down. If you were someone like Mr. Jimmy, that must be quite a nightmare to work it all out. So what I'd like to ask you is, do you agree with what Joe Bonamassa says here? Do you think Page is the hardest guitarist to emulate? And if you're a guitarist, I'm particularly interested in your opinion. This is what I think, but what really matters is what you think. So if you have an idea about this or any other topic connected to classic or contemporary music, please drop it in the section below, and remember to like and subscribe. Also, if you're enjoying the channel, consider helping us out by clicking on the thanks button right down there below, or if you prefer, use the Buy Me a Coffee link to leave a donation at the Buy Me a Coffee site. Finally, if you're in need of a bit of a financial boost, click on the Capital One link below and get yourself a new credit card by using their handy one-step application process. Thanks a lot.